The first slap came without warning, just like all the others before it. Vivian Tyler braced herself against the kitchen table, her honey-brown hair falling across her face as she steadied herself, tasting blood where her lip had split against her teeth. The year was 1875, and in the small ranching community of Telluride, Colorado, a woman's worth was measured in the children she bore, and after 6 years of marriage, Vivian's womb remained as barren as the winter fields. Worthless. Her father-in-law spat, his weathered face contorted with disgust. 6 years and nothing to show for it. I knew you'd be trouble the moment Harold brought you home. Vivian said nothing. What could she say that hadn't already been said? Her husband Harold stood by the doorway, eyes downcast, neither defending her nor joining in his father's cruelty. His silence was its own kind of violence. My son needs an heir, the old man continued, pacing the wooden floor of the farmhouse that had never truly felt like home to Vivian. The Tyler name won't die because you're broken. Father, please, Harold finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Not tonight. But the damage was done. Vivian straightened her back, wiped the blood from her lip, and walked stiffly toward the bedroom. Behind her, she could hear the men's voices drop to hushed tones, discussing her as if she were livestock that had failed to produce a calf. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made the aspens shimmer gold against the blue Colorado sky. Vivian rose before either of the men, her decision made in the dark hours of sleeplessness. She packed a small cloth bag with her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, the small pouch of coins she'd secretly saved from selling eggs and preserves at the general store. She waited until Harold left for the south pasture, until his father had settled into his morning pipe on the porch. Then she slipped out the back door, past the chicken coop, and down toward town. She had no plan beyond escaping the daily humiliation, no destination except away from the Tyler farm. Telluride was bustling with its usual morning activity when Vivian reached the main street. Miners heading to their shifts, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, and the clatter of wagon wheels on packed dirt created a familiar symphony. She kept her head down, conscious of her bruised lip, and made her way toward the stagecoach office. "When's the next coach out?" she asked the ticket agent, a thin man with spectacles that magnified his curious eyes. "Where to, Mrs. Tyler?" he asked, recognition dawning on his face. "Anywhere," she said, then reconsidered. "Denver." The agent consulted his ledger. 3 days from now, madam. Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. 3 days. She'd have to hide for 3 days before she could leave. "Everything all right, Mrs. Tyler?" The agent peered at her over his spectacles, his gaze lingering on her swollen lip. "Fine," she replied automatically. "Just visiting my cousin. When can I purchase a ticket? You can leave a deposit now, pay the rest when you board." Vivian counted out coins from her small pouch, feeling suddenly light-headed. What was she doing? Where would she go in Denver? Who would hire a woman with no skills beyond cooking and tending a garden? But the alternative, returning to that house, to their contempt, was unthinkable. As she turned to leave, the door to the office swung open and a tall figure filled the frame, silhouetted against the morning sun. He stepped inside, removing his hat, and Vivian found herself face to face with a stranger. He was taller than most men in Telluride, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. But he wasn't smiling now as his gaze fell on Vivian's bruised face. "Madam," he said, nodding politely before turning to the agent. "Got a telegram for Zachary Ingram. Just came in, Mr. Ingram," the agent replied, passing a yellow paper across the counter. "Bad news." The stranger Zachary Ingram scanned the telegram, his expression hardening. Cattle rustlers hit one of my neighbors up north, third ranch this month. He folded the paper and tucked it into his vest pocket. Obliged. Vivian moved to step around him, eager to be gone before anyone who might report back to Harold or his father saw her. But as she did, her foot caught on an uneven floorboard and she stumbled. Zachary's hand shot out, steadying her elbow. "Careful there," he said, and then his eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance more carefully, the hastily packed bag, the bruised lip, the fear she couldn't quite hide. Something in his expression shifted. "You headed somewhere, madam." "Just to the mercantile," she lied, pulling her arm gently from his grasp. The ticket agent cleared his throat. "Your change, Mrs. Tyler," he said, sliding a few coins across the counter. Zachary Ingram's eyes flicked to her hand as she took the money, noting the wedding band on her finger, then back to her face. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Mr. Parsons," he said to the agent without taking his gaze from Vivian, "I believe I'll need to change my plans." "When's that stage to Denver?" "Wednesday morning, Mr. Ingram, same as the ladies." Zachary nodded slowly. "I'll take a ticket for the same." Vivian felt a flash of panic. Was he planning to follow her, report back to Harold? She didn't know this man, didn't know his connection to her husband or his father. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, pushing past him toward the door. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, warming the cool mountain air. Vivian hurried down the boardwalk, unsure where to go. She couldn't return home, but she had 3 days to wait before the stage left. She had enough money for a room at the boarding house, but Mrs. Finch, who ran it, was a notorious gossip. The news of Vivian Tyler taking a room alone would reach Harold before sundown. "Mrs. Tyler," a deep voice called from behind her. She kept walking, quickening her pace. "Mrs. Tyler, wait." Zachary Ingram caught up to her in a few long strides. "I don't mean to frighten you." "You don't frighten me, Mr. Ingram," she lied, stopping but keeping her distance. "But I have business to attend to." "You're running," he said simply, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "And you've nowhere to go for 3 days. Vivian stared at him, her heart pounding. "How would you know that?" "I've seen that look before," he said. "My sister wore it years ago. And I know there's nothing harder than those days between deciding to leave and actually getting away." She blinked, surprised by his insight. "What do you want?" "To help if I can." He nodded toward the bruise on her face. "Whoever did that to you, husband, I'm guessing he'll be looking for you once he realizes you're gone." "And why would you help a woman you've never met?" His expression darkened momentarily. "Like I said, my sister wore that same look once. I wasn't there to help her then." He paused. "I own a ranch about 10 miles north of town. I've got a cabin on the property where my foreman stays when I'm gone. He's driving cattle to market in Durango right now. You'd be safe there until the stage leaves." Vivian shook her head. "You're asking me to go alone to a strange man's property." "How is that safer?" Zachary ran a hand through his dark hair, looking genuinely frustrated. "You're right. It sounds wrong when you put it that way." He glanced down the street, thinking. "Do you know Widow Jenkins?" Vivian nodded. Everyone in Telluride knew Martha Jenkins, who'd lost her husband in a mining accident 5 years ago and now ran a small but respectable dressmaking shop. "She does my mending when I'm in town. Good woman. Why don't we see if she'll accompany you? She can vouch for my character and stay with you if you'd like." It was a reasonable solution, but Vivian hesitated. Trusting anyone right now felt dangerous. "Why would you go to such trouble for a stranger?" she asked again. Zachary's expression softened, those lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. "Maybe I don't like seeing women with bruised faces. Maybe I've got a score to settle with God for my sister. Or maybe I just think everyone deserves a fair chance at a fresh start." He shrugged. "Take your pick, Mrs. Tyler." Before she could respond, a shout from down the street caught her attention. Vivian Tyler." It was Elmer Watts, who worked at the livery stable and had always been friendly with Harold. He was moving toward them with purpose. "Your husband's looking all over for you," he called. "Said you wandered off in a confused state. Said you haven't been right in the head lately." Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Harold was already looking for her, already spreading lies to bring her back. Zachary stepped slightly in front of her, casual but deliberate. "Morning, Elmer," he called. "Mrs. Tyler here was just helping me pick out a gift for my housekeeper, woman's perspective and all." Elmer slowed, looking uncertain. Zachary Ingram was well known in the area as a successful rancher, a man of means and reputation. "Oh, that's so. Well, her husband's mighty worried, said she might need a doctor's attention." "She seems perfectly lucid to me," Zachary replied easily. "But I'll be sure she gets home safe once we're finished with our business." Elmer hesitated, then nodded. "I'll let Harold know I found her." "You do that," Zachary said pleasantly, but there was steel beneath the courtesy. When Elmer had gone, Vivian released a shaky breath. "He'll tell Harold exactly where I am." "Which is why we need to move quickly," Zachary said, his tone matter of fact. "Your decision, Mrs. Tyler. I can help you disappear for 3 days, or you can take your chances." In that moment, with Harold's lackey already hunting her down and the prospect of being dragged back to the farm looming, Vivian made her choice. "Let's find Mrs. Jenkins," she said. Martha Jenkins proved to be as practical and discreet as her reputation suggested. After hearing an abbreviated version of Vivian's situation, she closed her shop early, packed a small bag of her own, and accompanied them to the livery where Zachary kept his horses when in town. "The Tylers have always been hard men," Martha commented as Zachary saddled a gentle mare for Vivian. "Harold's no different from his father, just quieter about it." "You know them well?" Zachary asked, tightening a cinch. "Well enough to know that girl's been through hell," Martha replied, nodding toward Vivian, who was securing her bag to the saddle. "The whole town's seen it, pretended not to. Shame on all of us." Zachary's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, helping the older woman onto her horse before mounting his own stallion, a powerful black animal that stood a hand taller than the mare's. They rode out of town by a back route, avoiding the main street where they might be seen. Vivian kept glancing nervously over her shoulder, expecting at any moment to hear Harold's shouts or see his father's wagon pursuing them. "He won't find you," Zachary assured her, noticing her fear. "Not where we're going." They rode for nearly 2 hours, following game trails and creek beds rather than the main road, climbing steadily into the forested foothills north of town. Eventually, they crested a rise, and Vivian saw a valley spread before them, golden with autumn grasses and bisected by a clear stream. Nestled against the far tree line was a substantial log house with a stone chimney, smoke curling lazily into the blue sky. Nearby stood a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark dots against the golden landscape. "The Rocking Eye," Zachary said, a note of pride in his voice. "My grandfather started it with 20 head of longhorns and a dream. My father built it up. Now it's mine to keep going." "It's beautiful," Vivian said honestly, the first real appreciation she'd felt in days. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the main house, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a large, shaggy beast that barked enthusiastically until Zachary called, "Settle down, Buck." A woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with iron gray hair pulled into a neat bun and a round, pleasant face. "Mr. Ingram, didn't expect you back so soon," she called. "Change of plans, Mrs. Davenport," Zachary replied, dismounting and helping Martha Jenkins down from her horse. "We have guests who'll be staying in the foreman's cabin for a few days." The housekeeper took in the scene Zachary, Martha, whom she clearly recognized, and Vivian with her bruised face and understanding passed across her features. "I'll get the cabin ready right away," she said, "and put on a fresh pot of coffee." Zachary helped Vivian down from her mare, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Mrs. Davenport has been with my family for 30 years, he told her quietly. "Practically raised me after my mother died. She's as trustworthy as they come." The foreman's cabin proved to be a snug, one-room structure with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, a washstand, and a neatly made bed. Mrs. Davenport bustled about, opening windows to air it out while Martha Jenkins helped Vivian unpack her few belongings. "You'll be safe here," Martha assured her. "Zachary Ingram's a good man, known him since he was a boy with skinned knees." "I've only just met him," Vivian said, still uncertain. "Why would he go to such lengths for a stranger?" Martha's eyes grew distant. "His sister, Rebecca, was married to a man from Silverton. Mean as a snake, that one. Beat her something terrible. She ran away 3 years back, tried to make it to Zachary's ranch." The older woman sighed. "They found her frozen to death in a snowstorm halfway here. She'd been carrying a baby too, though nobody knew it until they found her." Vivian pressed a hand to her mouth. "That's awful." Changed Zachary. He'd always been a good sort, but after Rebecca. Martha shook her head. "Let's just say he doesn't turn a blind eye to men who hurt women, and he doesn't much care what the law or custom has to say about a husband's rights over his wife." Later that evening, after a simple but hearty meal brought over from the main house by Mrs. Davenport, Zachary stopped by the cabin to check on them. "Everything you need?" he asked, standing respectfully at the door rather than entering. "More than enough, thank you," Vivian replied. Her fear had ebbed somewhat over the course of the day, replaced by a cautious gratitude. "I've sent one of my men to watch the stage office in town," he told her. "If your husband tries to buy a ticket to Denver or post someone there to watch for you, we'll know." "You've thought of everything," Martha commented, impressed. Zachary shrugged. "Just being cautious." "I'll leave you ladies to your rest now. If you need anything, I'm just across the yard." After he'd gone, Vivian sat by the window, watching the stars emerge over the valley. For the first time in years, she felt something akin to peace. Tomorrow would bring new worries: what she would do in Denver, how she would survive alone, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. The next morning, Vivian woke to the sound of horses in the yard. She peered through the window to see Zachary mounted on his black stallion, giving instructions to a group of cowboys. They rode out together, heading toward the distant pastures where cattle grazed. Martha was still sleeping, so Vivian dressed quietly and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp mountain air. Mrs. Davenport emerged from the main house, carrying a basket. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, handing it to Vivian. "Fresh biscuits and preserves, some bacon too." "You're very kind," Vivian said, accepting the basket gratefully. "Nonsense. Just doing what's right." The older woman hesitated, then asked gently, "That husband of yours, he's the one who marked your face like that?" Vivian touched her bruised lip self-consciously. "His father, actually. Harold just lets it happen." Mrs. Davenport clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "A man who won't protect his wife from harm isn't much of a man at all." Vivian couldn't disagree. In the early days of their marriage, she'd made excuses for Harold's passivity in the face of his father's cruelty. He was the only son, dependent on his father's approval and inheritance. He'd been raised to never question the old man. But as the years passed and the verbal abuse turned physical, Harold's continued silence had become its own kind of betrayal. "Mr. Ingram said you've been trying for a child." Mrs. Davenport asked, her tone sympathetic. Vivian nodded, a familiar ache blossoming in her chest. 6 years. His father says I'm worthless. Barren. The older woman's face softened. My own daughter tried for 8 years before her first came along. Sometimes the good Lord has his own timing. She patted Vivian's arm. And sometimes, dear, it's not the woman who's barren. Men don't like to admit that, but I've seen it often enough. The thought had occurred to Vivian before, but she'd never dared voice it. In Telluride, if a marriage produced no children, it was always the woman who bore the blame. Martha emerged from the cabin, and Mrs. Davenport excused herself to return to her duties. The two women shared the breakfast, talking quietly about Vivian's plans. "I have a cousin in Denver," Martha offered. "Runs a boarding house for working women. I could write to her, see if she has a place for you." "I'd be grateful," Vivian said, relief washing through her. "I have a little money saved, but not enough to last long. Can you read and cipher?" When Vivian nodded, Martha continued, "My cousin sometimes needs help with the books. You could work for your board until you find something better." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than Vivian had yesterday. A safe place to land, at least. They spent the morning in the cabin, Martha teaching Vivian some basic stitches used in dressmaking, skills that might help her find work in the city. Around midday, they heard a commotion from the direction of the main house, men's voices raised in argument. Peering through the window, Vivian felt her blood freeze. Harold Tyler and his father had ridden onto the property and were confronting Mrs. Davenport on the porch of the main house. "She's my wife," Harold's voice carried across the yard. "I have every right to take her home." Martha joined Vivian at the window. "Stay inside," she whispered. "I'll go see what's happening." Before she could move, the door to the cabin burst open and Zachary Ingram stepped inside, his expression grim. "They followed my man back from town," he explained quickly. "I've got the hands coming in, but we need to move you. Now." "Where?" Vivian asked, panic rising in her throat. "There's a line shack up in the high pasture. They won't find you there." He glanced at Martha. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm afraid I need to ask you to create a distraction. Go out there, tell them Vivian left on the morning stage to Durango." Martha squared her shoulders. "I can do that." Zachary turned to Vivian. "Grab your things. We'll slip out the back and circle around to the barn for horses." Her hands trembling, Vivian stuffed her few belongings into her bag. Outside, she could hear the elder Tyler's voice, loud and threatening. "If you're harboring her, Ingram, you're interfering with a man's rightful authority over his household. The law's on our side." Martha headed for the front door while Zachary led Vivian out the back. They skirted the edge of the cabin, keeping to the shadows of the trees beyond. From this angle, Vivian could see the confrontation unfolding by the main house. Harold standing uncertainly beside his father's wagon, the old man red-faced and shouting at Mrs. Davenport, who stood her ground on the porch steps. Martha emerged from around the corner of the cabin, walking confidently toward the group. "What's all this commotion about?" she called. The distraction worked. All heads turned toward Martha, giving Zachary and Vivian the chance to dash across an open space to the barn. Once inside its shadowy interior, Zachary moved quickly, saddling the same mare Vivian had ridden yesterday. "Can you ride alone?" he asked, leading the horse to her. "Yes," she said, though in truth, she'd rarely ridden without Harold or his father accompanying her. "Good. I'll follow as soon as I can, make sure they've gone." He helped her mount, then pressed something into her hand, a small revolver, its grip worn smooth with use. "Just in case." "Follow the creek upstream. The line shack's about 2 miles up, can't miss it. Vivian stared at the weapon, then at Zachary. I can't, you can, he said firmly, and you will if you need to. He stepped back, slapping the mare's flank. Go now, don't stop for anything. The mare trotted out the back of the barn and into the trees beyond. Vivian clutched the reins in one hand, the revolver tucked into her pocket, and urged the horse into a canter once they reached the creek. Behind her, she could hear shouting, but she didn't look back. The creek led her higher into the foothills, the terrain growing steeper and more rugged. The mare was sure-footed, picking her way carefully along the rocky bank. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Vivian spotted the line shack, a crude but solid structure nestled in a small clearing with a lean-to for horses attached. She dismounted carefully, legs shaky beneath her, and led the mare to the lean-to. Inside the shack, she found it basic but adequate: a narrow bunk against one wall, a small stove, a rough-hewn table and single chair, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Someone, Zachary or one of his men, used this place regularly enough to keep it provisioned. Vivian stoked a small fire in the stove to ward off the mountain chill, then sat on the bunk, the revolver in her lap, and waited. The afternoon light slanted through the single window, shadows lengthening as minutes stretched into hours. She found herself straining to hear over the gentle burble of the creek hoofbeats, voices, anything to indicate who might be approaching. When she finally heard a horse outside, she gripped the revolver tightly, heart hammering. There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Tyler, it's Zachary Ingram. Relief flooded through her. She opened the door to find him standing there, his black stallion ground tied nearby. They've gone, he said, stepping inside and removing his hat. Put up a fuss, threatened to bring the sheriff, but in the end they had no proof you were ever there. Martha and Mrs. Davenport held their ground admirably. Thank you, Vivian said, setting the revolver on the table, for everything. Zachary shrugged off her thanks, glancing around the small cabin. It's not much, but it'll do for tonight. We'll head back to the main ranch tomorrow, keep you out of sight until Wednesday. You didn't have to come all the way up here yourself, she said. You could have sent one of your men. I wanted to make sure you were all right. He met her gaze steadily. And I wanted to ask you something, Mrs. Tyler, something important. Vivian tensed slightly. What is it? Zachary ran a hand through his dark hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Your husband and his father, they said something I found curious. They seemed convinced you were unwell. Claimed you'd been suffering delusions, that you needed to be under a doctor's care. Vivian's laugh was bitter. Of course they did. It's easier than admitting the truth that they're abusive, that I'm fleeing for my safety. That's what I thought, Zachary nodded. But there was something specific, the old man said. Something about you getting notions after losing another baby. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. She sat heavily on the edge of the bunk. I'm sorry, Zachary said immediately, taking a step back. That was too personal. Please forget I asked. No, she said quietly. It's all right. It's true in a way. I did lose a baby, 3 actually, over the years. She stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. The last one was 6 months ago. I carried longer than before, nearly 5 months. Long enough to feel it moving. Her voice broke. Long enough to believe it might actually happen this time. Zachary's expression was one of deep compassion. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Tyler. After that, she continued, needing suddenly to explain, something changed in me. The way they spoke to me, treated me. I couldn't bear it anymore. Every day was a reminder of my failure. She looked up at him. But I'm not unwell, Mr. Ingram. I'm just done with being told I'm worthless. Zachary's jaw tightened. No one should ever call you that. He moved to the stove, adding another log to the fire. I'll sleep outside tonight, give you privacy. There's jerky and beans on the shelf if you're hungry. You don't have to sleep outside, Vivian said, surprising herself. It's cold and the bunk is wide enough for both of us if we're careful. He looked at her for a long moment. That wouldn't be proper, Mrs. Tyler. Nothing about this situation is proper, Mr. Ingram, she pointed out, and I'd rather not be alone tonight. In the end, they compromised. Zachary laid his bedroll on the floor beside the bunk, close enough for comfort, but maintaining propriety. They shared a simple meal of beans and jerky, talking quietly as darkness fell outside. Zachary told her about growing up on the ranch, about his sister Rebecca, about his dreams of expanding the Rocking Eye to be the finest cattle operation in Colorado. "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams beyond escaping the Tylers?" Vivian had to think about that. Dreams were a luxury she'd set aside long ago. "I suppose, peace, a little place of my own someday, work that matters," she hesitated, "and to stop feeling like my worth is tied to whether I can bear a child." Zachary was quiet for a moment. "My mother had only me after years of trying. Some women called her barren too, but my father never saw her that way." His voice softened with memory. "I remember him telling her once, when he thought I couldn't hear, that she'd given him the greatest gift in me, but even if she'd given him nothing at all, she'd still be everything to him." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was." Zachary stoked the fire one last time before they settled for the night. "Get some rest, Mrs. Tyler. Tomorrow will be better." Vivian lay on the bunk, listening to Zachary's steady breathing from the floor below. For the first time in years, she believed those words might actually be true. The morning brought clear skies and the scent of pine carried on a crisp breeze. They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining provisions, then rode out, taking a different route back to the main ranch. Zachary led them on a winding trail through dense forest and across rocky outcroppings that offered sweeping views of the valley below. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, pulling his stallion to a halt at a particularly spectacular vista. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch." Vivian had to agree. The valley stretched before them, golden and green, the stream a silver ribbon winding through it, and beyond, the rugged peaks of the San Juan Mountains rising blue and white against the sky. It was wilder and more beautiful than anything near the Tyler farm. "You're fortunate to have all this," she said. "I know it," he replied, his expression thoughtful. "My grandfather used to say that land was the only thing worth having because they aren't making any more of it." He chuckled. "But land means nothing without people to share it with." When they arrived back at the ranch, they found Martha Jenkins waiting anxiously on the porch of the foreman's cabin. "Thank goodness," she exclaimed, hurrying to meet them. "I was beginning to worry." "All's well," Zachary assured her, helping Vivian down from her mare. "Any sign of the Tylers?" "Not since yesterday. Mrs. Davenport's been keeping watch." Martha took Vivian's arm. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted." The day passed quietly. Vivian helped Martha mend some of Zachary's shirts, a task Mrs. Davenport had apparently been putting off. In the afternoon, Zachary rode out with his men to check on the cattle, returning at dusk with news that everything was calm in town. "My man says Harold Tyler was drinking at the saloon, telling anyone who'd listen that his wife had run off with another man." Zachary's expression was grim as he relayed this information over supper in the main house, where he'd invited Vivian and Martha to join him. "Let him think it," Vivian said, surprising herself with how little she cared about her reputation in Telluride. She would never return there anyway. "What about tomorrow?" Martha asked. "How will we get to the stage without being seen?" Zachary had clearly given this some thought. "I'll send 2 men with the wagon to create a distraction at the livery, make it seem like I'm having horses shipped to Denver." Meanwhile, we'll take the back roads into town, arrive just as the stage is loading." It was a good plan, and Vivian felt a surge of gratitude for his careful consideration. But beneath the gratitude was a growing sadness. Tomorrow she would leave, probably never to see Zachary Ingram again. The thought troubled her more than it should have after just 3 days' acquaintance. Later, as she prepared for bed in the foreman's cabin, Martha observed her pensive mood. "You've grown fond of him," the older woman said gently. Vivian couldn't deny it. "He's been kind when he had no obligation to be." "It's more than that," Martha said shrewdly. "And I believe the feeling's mutual. I've known Zachary Ingram most of his life, and I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." "Even if that were true," Vivian replied, "I'm still a married woman, and I'll be leaving tomorrow." Martha patted her hand. "Life has a way of working itself out, dear. Get some rest now." But sleep eluded Vivian. She lay awake, listening to Martha's soft snores and thinking about the future that awaited her in Denver. A room in a boarding house, work as a bookkeeper perhaps, a life of independence but also solitude. It was freedom from the Tylers, yes, but what would it be freedom for? And then there was Zachary. In 3 short days, he'd shown her more kindness and respect than Harold had in 6 years of marriage. The way he looked at her like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings were important, had awakened something in her she'd thought long dead. A sense of her own worth, separate from her ability to bear children. Outside, an owl called into the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Vivian closed her eyes, willing sleep to come, knowing tomorrow would bring difficult goodbyes. The morning of their departure dawned gray and cool, with low clouds hanging over the mountains, promising rain. Vivian dressed in her best and only good dress, a simple blue cotton that Martha had quickly altered to better fit her slender frame. Her few possessions were packed, and the small pouch of coins felt a bit heavier thanks to Zachary's insistence on paying her for the mending she'd done. Mrs. Davenport provided a hearty breakfast, fussing over Vivian like a mother hen. "You need meat on those bones if you're going to make it in the city," she insisted, piling Vivian's plate with eggs and bacon. Zachary appeared just as they were finishing, dressed in a clean shirt and his best coat. "Wagon's ready," he announced. "We should leave now to avoid any chance of running into trouble." The ride to town was tense but uneventful. They took a circuitous route that avoided the main road, approaching Telluride from the east rather than the north. Zachary rode ahead, alert for any sign of the Tylers, while Vivian and Martha followed in a small buggy he'd provided. "Are you nervous?" Martha asked as the first buildings of town came into view. "Terrified," Vivian admitted, "but determined." They reached the stage office with 15 minutes to spare before the Denver coach was scheduled to depart. Zachary's men had done their job well. A small crowd had gathered at the livery down the street, distracted by some minor commotion involving horses. The few people near the stage office paid little attention to the arrival of 2 women and a tall rancher. Inside, the ticket agent recognized Vivian immediately. "Mrs. Tyler," he said, his eyes widening. "Your husband's been looking for me." "Yes, I know," Vivian interrupted, her heart racing. "I need to complete my purchase for the Denver stage, please." The agent glanced uncertainly at Zachary, who stood imposingly beside her. "Right away, madam." Outside, the stage was being loaded with luggage and mail bags. A few other passengers milled about: a businessman in a suit, a young couple who looked to be newlyweds, and an elderly man who might have been a retired miner. "Your bag, Mrs. Tyler," the driver called, extending his hand for her small satchel. As she handed it over, a shout from down the street froze her blood. Vivian Tyler." Harold was pushing his way through the crowd at the livery, his father close behind. They'd spotted her. "Get in the coach," Zachary said urgently, opening the door. "Now." Vivian hesitated, turning to Martha. "Thank you for everything," she said quickly, embracing the older woman. "I'll write once I'm settled." "God go with you, dear," Martha replied, stepping back as Zachary helped Vivian into the coach. But before he could close the door, Harold reached them, red-faced and breathing hard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, grabbing for Vivian's arm. "Get out of there." Zachary stepped between them, his tall frame blocking Harold's access to the coach. "Let her go, Tyler." "She's my wife," Harold snarled, trying to push past him. "I have the right, you had the right to protect her," Zachary cut in, his voice dangerously low. "You had the right to stand up to your father when he put his hands on her. You had the right to be a man, but you chose differently." By now, the elder Tyler had caught up, his weathered face contorted with rage. "This is none of your business, Ingram. That woman belongs to my son. She belongs to herself," Zachary replied evenly. "And she's leaving. I suggest you let her go peacefully, unless you want the whole town to hear exactly why she's running from you." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Harold glanced around nervously, aware of the spectacle they were creating. "She's unwell," he tried, pitching his voice for the onlookers. "Confused. She needs to come home where I can care for her." From inside the coach, Vivian found her courage. "I'm perfectly well, Harold," she called, her clear voice carrying to the crowd. "I'm just done being your father's whipping girl while you stand by and watch." A murmur ran through the gathering townspeople. Harold's face flushed darker. "You heard the lady," Zachary said. "Now step back and let this coach depart." For a moment it seemed Harold might continue to resist, but his father grabbed his arm. "Let her go," the old man spat. "She's worthless anyway, barren as the winter fields. You can find a proper wife now, one who'll give you sons." The words were meant to hurt, to diminish her one last time in front of the whole town. But strangely, Vivian felt nothing but a sense of finality, of a chapter closing. She looked at Harold, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, a weak man who had never stood up for her, never truly loved her, never seen her as anything more than a means to an heir. The driver, eager to be away from the drama, called, "All aboard who's coming aboard," and climbed up to his seat. Zachary took a step toward the coach, and for one heart-stopping moment, Vivian thought he might climb in beside her. Instead, he reached for her hand through the window. "Safe journey, Mrs. Tyler," he said formally, but his eyes conveyed so much more. She squeezed his fingers briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram, for everything." The coach lurched forward and Zachary stepped back. The last thing Vivian saw as they pulled away was his tall figure standing straight and steady in the middle of the street, watching her go. The journey to Denver was long and arduous, the coach stopping at small settlements along the way to change horses and allow passengers brief respites. Vivian kept to herself, politely deflecting questions from the curious newlyweds. At night, they stayed in rough roadhouses where she shared a room with the young bride, grateful for the female companionship even as she envied the girl's obvious happiness. On the third day, as mountains gave way to foothills and eventually to the sprawling plains that surrounded Denver, Vivian found herself growing increasingly anxious. Martha's cousin had been telegraphed about her arrival, but what if there was no room at the boarding house? What if she couldn't find work? What if Harold somehow tracked her down? By the time the coach rolled into Denver in the late afternoon, Vivian's nerves were stretched to breaking. The city was larger and noisier than she'd imagined, with paved streets, brick buildings several stories tall, and crowds of people hurrying in all directions. She clutched her small bag and stepped down from the coach, feeling overwhelmed and very alone. "Mrs. Tyler," a voice called. Vivian turned to see a stout, gray-haired woman approaching, her round face creased in a friendly smile. "I'm Agatha Simmons, Martha's cousin," the woman said, extending a gloved hand. "She telegraphed about you. I hope your journey wasn't too taxing." Relief flooded through Vivian. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Simmons, and thank you for agreeing to take me in on such short notice." "Nonsense, dear. Any friend of Martha's is welcome." Agatha signaled to a porter to take Vivian's bag. "My boarding house is just a few blocks from here. We can walk if you're not too tired." As they made their way through the busy streets, Agatha kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter, pointing out landmarks and shops of interest. The boarding house, when they reached it, proved to be a handsome three-story brick building on a tree-lined street, with a discreet sign announcing Simmons House for Working Women. "I have 15 residents at present," Agatha explained as she led Vivian inside. "All respectable women with employment in offices, shops, or as teachers. I run a proper establishment, no gentlemen callers beyond the parlor, and a strict curfew at 9 o'clock. The interior was clean and modestly furnished, with a comfortable parlor, a dining room where several women were already gathering for the evening meal, and a narrow staircase leading to the upper floors. "You'll be in a small room on the 3rd floor, I'm afraid," Agatha said apologetically. "It's all I have at the moment, but it has a lovely view of the garden." The room, when they reached it, was indeed small, just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk and chair, and a wardrobe. But the window overlooked a charming garden, and the bed linens looked fresh and clean. "It's perfect," Vivian said sincerely. "I can't thank you enough. Martha mentioned you have experience with bookkeeping." When Vivian nodded, Agatha continued, "Excellent. I've been in need of help with the accounts. We can discuss terms after you've rested and had something to eat." Left alone in her new room, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. She was safe for now. She had shelter, the promise of work, and a fresh start in a city where no one knew her as Harold Tyler's Barren wife. It was everything she'd hoped for when she'd fled Telluride. So why did she feel this hollow ache in her chest? The answer came unbidden. Zachary Ingram. In just 3 days, he'd shown her what it meant to be truly seen and valued. The memory of his kind eyes, his steady presence, his unwavering support haunted her. She would likely never see him again, and that knowledge hurt more than she'd expected. Sighing, Vivian unpacked her few belongings and changed for dinner. There would be time enough for regrets later. For now, she needed to focus on building her new life. The weeks that followed settled into a steady routine. Vivian proved adept at managing the boarding house accounts, and Agatha soon trusted her with other responsibilities, ordering supplies, interviewing prospective residents, even planning the weekly menus. The work was satisfying, and the modest salary, combined with room and board, allowed her to begin saving for a future she was only now daring to imagine. The other residents of Simmons' house were mostly young women working as shop assistants, clerks, or seamstresses. A few were older, widows supporting themselves as teachers or nurses. They welcomed Vivian into their circle, inviting her to accompany them to church socials or Sunday afternoon walks in the city park. Vivian told them only that she was a widow, recently arrived from a small mountain town. If they noticed her occasional melancholy, or the fact that she wore no wedding ring, they were too polite to mention it. In time, she made friends among them, particularly with a lively young typist named Clara who worked at the Denver Post. "You should learn to type," Clara suggested one evening as they sat in the parlor, Vivian mending a tear in her skirt. "The newspaper's always looking for good typists, and it pays better than bookkeeping." It was a sensible suggestion, and Vivian resolved to look into typing lessons. Her life was taking shape, becoming something she could be proud of. Yet in quiet moments, her thoughts still drifted to the Rocking Eye Ranch and its owner. One morning in early December, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Denver, Vivian was reviewing the household accounts in the small office Agatha had set aside for her use when there was a knock at the door. "Package for you, Miss Vivian," said Molly, the young maid who helped with the cleaning and cooking at the boarding house. Puzzled, Vivian accepted the small parcel. It was wrapped in brown paper and string with her name written in a bold, masculine hand she didn't recognize. There was no return address. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a delicate pattern of leaves and flowers. A folded note lay atop it. "Mrs. Tyler, I hope this finds you well and settled in Denver. Martha Jenkins gave me the address of her cousin's boarding house, with the assurance that she would forward this if you had moved elsewhere. I thought you might have use for a journal. My sister kept one, and she often said it helped her make sense of difficult times. Perhaps it might serve you similarly. I find myself thinking of you often and hoping you've found the peace you sought when you left Telluride. Should you ever wish to correspond, a letter addressed to the Rocking Eye will find me." With respect and admiration, Zachary Ingram Vivian read the note 3 times, her heart racing. He had thought of her. He had taken the trouble to send her a gift, and he had left the door open for further communication. Without allowing herself time for doubt, she pulled a sheet of writing paper from her desk drawer and began to compose a reply. "Dear Mr. Ingram, your thoughtful gift arrived this morning and moved me deeply. The journal is beautiful, and I shall indeed put it to good use. Thank you for your kindness, both now and during those difficult days in Telluride. I am well settled in Denver. Mrs. Simmons has been most generous, providing me with not only accommodation but employment, managing the accounts of her boarding house. The work is satisfying, and I am surrounded by good women whose friendship has been a comfort. I hope this letter finds you and your ranch thriving. Has winter come to the mountains yet? I find I miss the sight of snow on the peaks, though Denver has its own kind of beauty. I think often of your hospitality and courage. Without your intervention, I fear what might have become of me. With sincere gratitude, Vivian Tyler." She sealed the letter before she could reconsider, and that afternoon walked to the post office to mail it herself. The exchange of letters that followed became a lifeline for Vivian. Zachary wrote of the ranch, the early winter snows, a troublesome wolf that had been preying on calves, his plans for spring expansion. Vivian shared stories of her life in Denver, her typing lessons, the amusing eccentricities of her fellow boarders, her growing confidence in managing the boarding house finances. Their correspondence remained formal at first, the letters of respectful acquaintances. But as winter deepened, a subtle shift occurred. Zachary began to include more personal reflections, memories of his childhood on the ranch, his hopes for the future, his loneliness since his parents' passing. Vivian, in turn, found herself confiding in him about her fears and dreams, her struggles to define herself beyond the limitations of her marriage. "I have begun to wonder," she wrote in February, "if what my in-laws called barrenness might have been a blessing in disguise. Can you imagine a child raised in that house of cruelty? Perhaps God, in his wisdom, was protecting an innocent soul from such a fate." Zachary's reply came swiftly. "Your perspective shows remarkable grace, but please know this: the fault was never yours. A flower cannot bloom in poisoned soil, no matter how strong its nature. You deserved gentleness and respect, not condemnation for something beyond your control. I believe, with all my heart, that you would make a wonderful mother, should life ever grant you that opportunity. but your worth has never depended on that role. You are valuable for who you are, your kindness, your courage, your resilience. When I think of you, I do not see lack or failure. I see a woman of tremendous worth." Vivian read those words with tears streaming down her face. No one had ever spoken to her with such understanding, such affirmation of her intrinsic value. In March, her letter to Zachary contained news. "I have consulted a lawyer regarding my situation with Harold. He informs me that in Colorado, abandonment for a period of 1 year is grounds for divorce, even without the husband's consent. I have 6 more months before I can petition the court, but the lawyer seems confident of a favorable outcome, particularly given the circumstances of my departure. I find myself both fearful and hopeful at the prospect of this legal freedom, fearful of Harold's potential reaction, yet hopeful for the chance to truly begin anew." Zachary's response was supportive, but contained a surprise. "I am relieved to hear that a path to freedom exists for you, though I understand your mixed emotions. Legal matters aside, you have already claimed your independence in the ways that matter most. I must inform you that your husband has been causing trouble in Telluride. According to my sources in town, he has taken to drinking heavily and spreading malicious rumors about your departure. His father's health has deteriorated, and there is talk that the Tyler farm may be sold to cover debts. More concerning, Harold has made threatening remarks about me and my role in your departure. While I give little weight to the words of a drunk, I thought you should be aware. On a more personal note, business will bring me to Denver next month. The railroad is expanding its cattle shipping facilities, and I must negotiate new contracts. Would it be agreeable to you if I called at Mrs. Simmons' boarding house during my stay? I would very much like to see you again, if only briefly." Vivian's heart raced as she read that final paragraph. See Zachary again. The prospect filled her with both excitement and trepidation. Their correspondence had grown increasingly warm over the months, but face-to-face interaction was different. What if the connection they'd developed through letters didn't translate to person? Despite her concerns, she couldn't deny her desire to see him again. Her reply was carefully worded. "I would be pleased to receive you at Simmons' house during your visit to Denver. Mrs. Simmons allows residents to entertain callers in the parlor between the hours of 2 and 8 in the evening. Perhaps you might join me for tea one afternoon. I appreciate the information about Harold, troubling though it is. I pray that he finds peace somehow, though I cannot and will not return to that life. Until April then." April arrived with warm sunshine and the first green buds on the trees lining Denver's streets. Vivian found herself growing increasingly nervous as Zachary's visit approached. She purchased a new dress, a modest but becoming garment in a deep blue that complemented her eyes, and spent more time than usual arranging her hair on the morning he was expected. "You look lovely, dear," Agatha commented as Vivian checked her appearance one final time before descending to the parlor. "This Mr. Ingram must be quite special to warrant such attention." Vivian felt herself blush. "He's a friend who helped me through a difficult time. Nothing more." Agatha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced, but she said nothing further. At precisely 3 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Vivian waited in the parlor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as Molly went to answer it. A moment later, the parlor door opened, and Zachary Ingram stepped into the room. He looked exactly as she remembered, yet somehow more taller, broader, his presence filling the modest parlor. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit rather than the ranch clothes she was accustomed to seeing him in, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But his eyes were the same warm, direct, with those lines at the corners that deepened when he smiled, as he was smiling now. "Mrs. "Tyler," he said, removing his hat as Molly discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. "Mr. Ingram," Vivian replied, rising from her seat. "How good to see you again." There was an awkward moment when neither seemed to know whether to shake hands, embrace, or simply nod in greeting. Zachary solved the dilemma by stepping forward and taking her hand gently in his, a brief, warm contact that sent a flutter through Vivian's chest. "You look well," he said, his gaze taking in her appearance with obvious approval. "Denver agrees with you." "As does the absence of certain individuals," she replied with a small smile. "Please sit down. Shall I ring for tea?" The initial awkwardness faded quickly as they fell into conversation. Zachary spoke of his business in Denver, contracts signed, new opportunities for expanding his herd, while Vivian shared news of her recent promotion to full bookkeeper at Simmons' house, with a corresponding increase in her modest salary. "I'm saving to rent rooms of my own," she told him. "Not that Mrs. Simmons hasn't been wonderful, but I find myself craving a place that's truly mine." "A worthy goal," Zachary nodded. "Independence suits you." Their tea arrived, served by a curious Molly who lingered longer than necessary, clearly intrigued by the handsome visitor. When they were alone again, the conversation turned to more personal matters. "Have you heard anything more about Harold?" Vivian asked, her voice lowered despite the privacy of the parlor. Zachary's expression grew serious. "His father passed away last month. Pneumonia, I'm told." "Oh." Vivian was surprised by the complex emotions this news stirred in her, a residual fear of the man who had treated her so cruelly, but also a strange sense of closure. "And Harold inherited the farm, such as it is, but he's drinking more heavily than ever. I doubt he'll manage to keep it going for long." Zachary hesitated, then added, "He still speaks of you, not kindly." Vivian nodded, unsurprised. "I expected as much, but I'm beyond his reach now." "Yes, you are," Zachary agreed, his tone fierce with protectiveness. Then more gently, "You've built a good life here." "I'm trying," she said. "Some days are easier than others. I still—" She hesitated, uncertain whether to share her deepest vulnerability. "Tell me," Zachary encouraged. "I still dream of children sometimes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wake up thinking I've heard a baby crying, and for just a moment I forget that I never had one. Never will, perhaps." Zachary reached across the small table between them, taking her hand in his. "You don't know that for certain, and even if it were true, it doesn't diminish your worth in the slightest." The sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his hand on hers, brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding. Then, reluctantly, Zachary released her hand. "I have a confession to make," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "My business in Denver is genuine, but it's not the only reason I came." Vivian's heart quickened. "Oh." "I wanted to see you." His direct gaze held hers. "Your letters have become important to me, more than important. I find myself watching for the mail rider, disappointed when there's nothing from you." "I feel the same," Vivian admitted, her cheeks warming. "Your letters are a bright spot in my days." Zachary took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Vivian, may I call you Vivian?" When she nodded, he continued, "I know your situation is complicated. You're still legally married, and you've only just begun building a life of your own. I have no right to complicate things further." "But," she prompted, sensing there was more. "But I care for you," he said simply. "More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances. And I needed to tell you so face to face, even if nothing can come of it right now." Vivian felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "Zachary," she said, his name feeling both foreign and familiar on her tongue. "I care for you too. These past months, your letters have been my anchor. Your friendship, and yes, something more than friendship, has given me strength." Relief and joy spread across his features. "Then I'm not alone in these feelings." "No," she assured him, "you're not." They talked for hours after that, planning nothing specific but acknowledging the potential that existed between them. Zachary would be in Denver for 3 more days, and they arranged to meet again, a walk in the park the following afternoon, dinner at a respectable restaurant the evening after that. When he finally took his leave, standing in the boarding house foyer with his hat in his hands, he asked hesitantly, "May I write to you even more frequently now, and perhaps visit again when business allows?" "Yes," Vivian said without hesitation. "Yes to both." He smiled then, that warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and on an impulse leaned down to press a chaste kiss to her cheek. "Until tomorrow, then." The 3 days of Zachary's visit passed in a blur of stolen hours together, walks through Denver's parks, a visit to a photography studio where they sat for a portrait together. A memento for him to take back to the ranch, he insisted. And meals in restaurants where they talked for so long that waiters hovered impatiently, waiting to clear their tables. On his final evening in Denver, they sat in a quiet corner of a respectable restaurant, lingering over dessert neither of them was eating, reluctant for the evening to end. "I've been thinking," Zachary said, tracing patterns on the tablecloth with his fingertip. 6 more months until you can file for divorce seems an eternity." "It does," Vivian agreed, her heart heavy at the thought of their separation. Their correspondence would continue, but after these days together, letters seemed a poor substitute for his presence. "What if," he said slowly, "there were a way to make the time pass more productively?" Vivian tilted her head questioningly. "What do you mean?" "The ranch is expanding. I've purchased additional land, and I'll need more hands to manage it all." He met her gaze directly. "I also need someone with a head for figures to manage the accounts. Mrs. Davenport tries her best, but she'd be the first to admit that bookkeeping isn't her strength." Understanding dawned on Vivian. "Are you offering me a position at the Rocking Eye?" "I am," he confirmed. "A professional position with fair wages and proper accommodations. You would have your own cabin, the foreman's cabin you stayed in before, complete independence." "But what would people say?" Vivian worried. "A single woman living on your property working for you, Mrs. Davenport would act as chaperone," Zachary assured her. "And Martha Jenkins has expressed interest in relocating to the area as well. Her dressmaking business in Telluride has suffered since certain parties began spreading rumors about her role in your departure." Vivian felt a pang of guilt. "Oh no, I never meant for her to suffer because she helped me." "She doesn't blame you in the slightest," Zachary was quick to reassure her. "In fact, when I mentioned the possibility of offering you a position, she immediately volunteered to move to the ranch as well. Said she's always fancied country living." The idea was tempting, incredibly tempting. To be near Zachary, to work at something meaningful, to live in that beautiful valley. But Vivian had concerns. "What about Harold? Telluride isn't that far from your ranch." "Wouldn't my presence there provoke him?" Zachary's expression hardened slightly. "Let him try to cause trouble. My men are loyal and the ranch is private property. Harold Tyler would find no welcome there." "And after the divorce?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What then?" Zachary reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Then, Vivian Tyler, if you'll allow me, I'd like to court you properly, and if in time you come to feel for me what I already feel for you." He trailed off, his meaning clear: marriage. He was speaking of marriage eventually. Vivian's heart raced at the thought. After her experience with Harold, she had imagined she might never want to marry again. But Zachary was nothing like Harold. He had shown her, consistently and without expectation, what a good man could be. I need time to consider, she said finally. This is a significant decision. Of course, he agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. The offer stands whether you accept it tomorrow or 6 months from now. When they parted that night on the steps of Simmons' house, their goodbye was bittersweet. Zachary would return to his ranch the next morning, and there was no telling when they might see each other again. "Write to me," he said, holding her hands in his. "Whatever you decide." "I will," she promised. Then, with a quick glance to ensure they weren't observed, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, gentle kiss that held both promise and restraint. "Until we meet again, Vivian." She watched him walk away, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Hope for a future she had never dared imagine, fear that it might somehow slip through her fingers, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that her place was with this man who saw her true worth. The decision, when it came, was easier than Vivian had expected. 2 weeks after Zachary's visit, she sat down to write him a letter accepting his offer of employment at the Rocking Eye Ranch. She would give Mrs. Simmons a month's notice, settle her affairs in Denver, and travel to the ranch in June. "I have considered all angles carefully," she wrote. "The practical benefits are clear: better pay, meaningful work, the beauty of the mountains I've come to miss. But I would be dishonest if I didn't admit that the greatest draw is the prospect of being near you. We both know that propriety must be maintained until my divorce is final. I accept the position with the clear understanding that our relationship, for now, must remain that of employer and employee, at least in the eyes of the world. But in my heart, Zachary, I carry the hope of a future where we might be something more to each other." Zachary's reply arrived by special messenger just 3 days later. He must have dispatched a ranch hand to Denver immediately upon receiving her letter. "Your acceptance brings me more joy than I can express in writing. Mrs. Davenport is already preparing the foreman's cabin, and Martha Jenkins arrives next week to establish her dressmaking shop in a small building near the main house that once served as a tack room. I have spoken with my ranch hands about the new bookkeeper joining us, a widow from Denver with excellent references from Mrs. Simmons. They are looking forward to having the accounts managed professionally at last. As for the other matter, yes, propriety must be maintained. But know that in my heart you are already so much more than an employee. I count the days until June." The month passed in a flurry of preparations. Vivian trained her replacement at the boarding house, said goodbye to the friends she'd made in Denver, and packed her few belongings. Mrs. Simmons, who had guessed at least some portion of the truth about Vivian's relationship with Zachary, gave her blessing along with practical advice. "Men are not all like your first husband," she said as they shared a final cup of tea in her private parlor. "My Herbert was a gentle soul who never raised his voice to me in 40 years of marriage. Your Mr. Ingram strikes me as cut from similar cloth." "He's not my Mr. Ingram," Vivian protested weakly. "At least not yet. But he will be," Agatha said with confidence. "Any fool can see the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him, my dear." On a bright June morning, Vivian boarded the stage to Telluride, her heart racing with anticipation and a touch of nervousness. What if things were different now? What if the connection she'd felt with Zachary somehow diminished in the day-to-day reality of working together? Her fears proved groundless. Zachary was waiting for her when the stage arrived in Telluride, his tall figure standing out among the crowd at the depot. The moment she stepped down, his face lit with a smile that erased any doubt in Vivian's mind. "Welcome back," he said simply, taking her bag. "The ranch is waiting." The foreman's cabin had been transformed since Vivian's brief stay there the previous autumn. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and a small desk had been placed beneath the window, her workspace when she wasn't using the office in the main house. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table, their bright blooms a cheerful welcome. Martha and Mrs. Davenport did all this, Zachary explained as he carried her trunk inside. They were determined you should have a proper home, not just quarters. It's perfect, Vivian said, genuinely moved by their thoughtfulness. The transition to life at the Rocking Eye was surprisingly smooth. Vivian took to the bookkeeping work with enthusiasm, discovering a genuine talent for managing the complex finances of a large cattle operation. The ranch hands, initially wary of this city woman in their midst, soon came to appreciate her efficiency and her willingness to learn about their work. Martha Jenkins set up her dressmaking shop in the converted tack room, and soon women from neighboring ranches were making the journey to have dresses fitted or altered by the skilled seamstress who had once served Telluride's finest families. Her presence, along with that of Mrs. Davenport, provided the propriety necessary for Vivian to live and work at the ranch without scandal. As for Zachary, he was everything Vivian had remembered and more. During the day, he treated her with professional respect, consulting her on financial matters and introducing her to every aspect of ranch operations. But in the evenings, when work was done, they often walked together along the creek or sat on the porch of the main house, talking until the stars emerged above the mountains. They were careful always in public view, always with Martha or Mrs. Davenport nearby. But the connection between them deepened with each passing day, a quiet understanding that required few words. July turned to August, and the mountain meadows blazed with wildflowers. Vivian had been at the ranch for 2 months when the first hint of trouble arrived in the form of a rider from town. "Letter for Mrs. Tyler," the young man announced, handing an envelope to Zachary, who happened to be in the yard when he arrived. Zachary brought it to Vivian in the office, his expression concerned. "It's from a law firm in Denver," he said, recognizing the return address stamped on the envelope. Vivian opened it with trembling fingers, reading quickly. "It's from my lawyer," she said, relief washing through her. "Harold has been served with notice of my petition for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. The hearing is set for November." "That's good news," Zachary said cautiously. "Isn't it?" "Yes," Vivian agreed. "But the lawyer warns that Harold may contest it. If he does, I'll need to appear in court to testify." The prospect was daunting. To face Harold again, to recount the details of his neglect and his father's cruelty before strangers. Vivian shuddered at the thought. "You won't face him alone," Zachary promised, his hand covering hers on the desk. "Whatever happens, I'll be with you." September brought the first hints of autumn to the mountains, aspen leaves turning gold against the dark pines. Ranch life followed its timeless rhythms, cattle being moved to lower pastures in anticipation of winter, hay being stored in the barn, preparations being made for the cold months ahead. Vivian settled into these rhythms, finding unexpected joy in the cycle of seasons and the daily work of the ranch. She began riding out with Zachary occasionally, learning the boundaries of the property and the names of the various pastures and streams that compose the Rocking Eye. It was on one such ride, a glorious October afternoon with the mountains ablaze in autumn colors, that Zachary brought his horse alongside hers at the top of a ridge overlooking the valley. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gazing out at the landscape spread before them. "It never ceases to take my breath away," Vivian agreed. Zachary turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "Vivian, there's something I need to ask you," her heart quickened. "Yes. Your divorce hearing is next month. If all goes well, you'll be legally free." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've been patient, or tried to be, But I need to know once you're free, what then? Will you stay at the Rocking Eye? Will you allow me to court you properly with marriage in mind? Vivian had asked herself these same questions many times over the past months. Working at the ranch had given her a taste of independence she'd never known before. She was good at her job, respected for her skills, building a life on her own terms. Part of her feared losing that independence in marriage, even to a man as kind and respectful as Zachary. But another part, the part that looked forward to their evening conversations, that felt her heart race when their hands accidentally touched, that imagined a future together, knew what her answer must be. Yes, she said simply. To both questions. I want to stay and I want you. The joy that spread across Zachary's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand in his. I love you, Vivian Tyler, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I think I have since that first day in the stage office, when you stood there with your bruised face and your determined spirit, ready to face the world alone rather than endure another day of cruelty. And I love you, she replied, the words surprisingly easy to say now that the moment had arrived. You who saw value in me when I'd been told I was worthless. You who gave me shelter without expectation. You who wrote letters that kept me going through lonely nights in Denver. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. One more month, he said. One more month of propriety, and then, if you'll have me, I'll court you properly. Though I warn you, he added with a smile, it may be a short courtship. I've waited long enough to make you my wife. Wife, Vivian repeated, testing the word that had once meant only obligation and disappointment to her. With Zachary, it sounded like promise, like hope. Their moment of perfect understanding was shattered by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. They turned to see one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tomas, riding hard toward them. Mr. Ingram, he called as he reached them. Trouble at the ranch. Harold Tyler showed up, drunk and waving a gun, demanding to see his wife. Vivian's blood ran cold. Oh, God. Zachary's expression hardened. Is anyone hurt? No, sir, Tomas replied. Mrs. Davenport wouldn't let him in the house, and Miss Jenkins is keeping him talking on the porch. But he's in a state, sir. Said he won't leave without Mrs. Tyler. Ride back, Zachary ordered, his voice calm but authoritative. Tell everyone to stay clear of him. I'm coming. He turned to Vivian, his expression softening. You should stay here where it's safe. But Vivian shook her head. No. I won't hide while he terrorizes the people who have shown me nothing but kindness. This is my problem to face. Zachary looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. Stay behind me, he said. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand? They rode back to the ranch at a gallop, arriving to find a tense standoff on the front porch of the main house. Harold Tyler stood swaying slightly, a revolver in his hand, while Martha Jenkins stood a few feet away, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Mrs. Davenport peered anxiously from a window, and several ranch hands hovered at a distance, uncertain how to proceed without endangering the women. Where is she? Harold was demanding as they rode into the yard. Where's my wife hiding? Mr. Tyler, be reasonable, Martha was saying. You're in no state to. I'm right here, Harold, Vivian called, dismounting from her horse despite Zachary's attempt to stop her. Harold spun around, his bloodshot eyes widening as he caught sight of her. Vivian, he slurred, the gun wavering in his unsteady hand. Finally come to your senses, have you? I've come to ask you to leave, she replied, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. You're trespassing on private property. Harold's face darkened with rage. Trespassing? You're my wife. Everything you have belongs to me by law. Not for much longer, Vivian said. You were served with divorce papers, Harold. In November, a judge will end our marriage. Like hell he will, Harold spat, raising the gun. No wife of mine is getting a divorce. You're coming home with me now where you belong. Zachary stepped between them, his tall frame shielding Vivian. Lower the gun, Tyler, he said calmly. You don't want to add murder to your troubles. You, Harold snarled, focusing on Zachary. This is all you're doing, stealing my wife, turning her against me. My father was right about her worthless as a woman, can't even bear a child, but she's still mine. I was never yours, Vivian said, stepping out from behind Zachary despite his attempt to keep her back. I was never a possession for you to own, and I'm not worthless. The hell you aren't. Harold shouted. 6 years and not a single child. What good is a barren wife? She's worth everything, Zachary said, his voice ringing with conviction. Everything to me. Her value isn't in her womb, Tyler. It's in her heart, her mind, her spirit, all the things you and your father were too blind to see. Harold's face contorted with rage. You can have her then, he spat, swinging the gun toward Zachary. If you want a barren woman so badly, you can die for her too. Everything happened so quickly after that. Harold's finger tightened on the trigger. Vivian screamed, lunging forward to push Zachary aside. The gun fired with a deafening crack. Pain bloomed in Vivian's side as she fell, Zachary's arms catching her before she hit the ground. There were shouts, the sound of running feet. Through a haze of pain, Vivian saw the ranch hands subduing Harold, wresting the gun from his hand. Then Zachary's face filled her vision, his expression terrified. Vivian. My God, Vivian, stay with me. She tried to speak, but a cough rattled through her, tasting of copper. Warm wetness spread across her side. Get the doctor, Zachary shouted to someone beyond her field of vision. Ride to town fast as you can, Zachary, she managed to whisper, reaching up to touch his face. I love you. Don't, he pleaded, tears in his eyes. Don't say it like a goodbye. You're going to be fine. But darkness was closing in at the edges of her vision, and the pain was fading to a distant throb. The last thing she heard was Zachary's voice, raw with emotion, saying words that followed her into the darkness. Hold on, Vivian. You're worth everything to me. Everything. Awareness returned slowly, first sound, the murmur of voices nearby. Then sensation, the softness of a bed beneath her, the dull throb of pain in her side. Finally sight, as Vivian opened her eyes to a familiar ceiling. She was in the main house, in what must be Zachary's bedroom, judging by the masculine furnishings. She's awake, Mrs. Davenport's voice called from somewhere nearby. Mr. Ingram, she's awake. Then Zachary was there, his face haggard with exhaustion but alight with relief. Vivian, he breathed, taking her hand gently in his. Thank God. What happened? She asked, her voice a raspy whisper. Harold shot you, he said grimly. The bullet grazed your ribs, painful, and you lost blood but not life-threatening. Dr. Mills said you were lucky. Memory returned in fragments. Harold on the porch, the gun, the deafening crack of the shot. Harold, she said. Where is he? In the Telluride jail, Zachary replied, his jaw tightening. Charged with attempted murder. The sheriff took him away after the doctor arrived. How long have I been unconscious? 2 days. Zachary's hand tightened around hers. 2 of the longest days of my life. Mrs. Davenport appeared at the bedside, her round face creased with concern. You gave us quite a scare, young lady. Now can you manage some broth? You need to regain your strength. Over the next week, Vivian recovered slowly in Zachary's care. He had insisted she take his room, saying it was the most comfortable in the house, while he slept on a cot in his office. Mrs. Davenport and Martha Jenkins took turns sitting with her, ensuring she was never alone. News came from town that Harold had been formally charged and was awaiting trial. The sheriff had also relayed a message from Vivian's lawyer in Denver given the circumstances. The divorce hearing had been expedited. The lawyer would be traveling to Telluride the following week to take Vivian's testimony, and the judge had agreed to rule on the case immediately thereafter. "You won't have to appear in court after all," Zachary told her, sitting beside her bed on the evening of this news. "Your lawyer seems confident that the divorce will be granted without issue, especially now that Harold has demonstrated his violent nature so publicly." "It seems strange," Vivian mused, "to find freedom this way through violence and pain." "Some chains require dramatic breaking," Zachary said, taking her hand, "but I wish with all my heart that you hadn't been hurt in the process." On the day the lawyer arrived from Denver, Vivian insisted on receiving him in the parlor rather than her sick. She was pale but composed as she gave her testimony the years of verbal abuse from her father-in-law, Harold's passive complicity, the slap that had been the final straw, and finally, the shooting at the Rocking Eye. "Given these circumstances and the criminal charges pending against Mr. Tyler, I see no impediment to an immediate judgment," the lawyer said, closing his notebook. "The judge in Denver has authorized me to inform you that your petition for divorce is granted, effective immediately." "You are legally free, Mrs." He paused, looking slightly confused. "Tyler," Vivian supplied. "For now I remain Vivian Tyler, but perhaps not for long." She glanced at Zachary, who sat nearby, his expression a mixture of joy and reverence. They had spoken often during her recovery about their future together. After the lawyer had gone, Zachary came to sit beside Vivian on the parlor sofa. "So," he said, taking her hand, "you are a free woman at last." "I am," she agreed, looking down at their intertwined fingers. "Free to make my own choices." "And what do you choose, Vivian Tyler?" he asked softly. She met his gaze steadily. "You, us, a future together." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I had planned to court you properly," he said. "Take you to dinner in town, bring you flowers, all the things a gentleman should do." "We've never done things in the conventional order," Vivian pointed out with a small smile. "Why start now?" Zachary laughed, then grew serious again. "I love you, Vivian. I want to marry you, to build a life with you right here on this land that I love almost as much as I love you." "Then ask me," she said simply. He slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. "Vivian Tyler, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of sharing my name, my home, my heart for all the days we're given?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Zachary Ingram, with all my heart, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony on the front porch of the ranch house, the very spot where Harold's bullet had nearly ended their chance at happiness. Martha Jenkins had worked day and night to create a wedding dress for Vivian, a modest but elegant gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Davenport had baked a cake large enough to feed all the ranch hands, who stood in a respectful semicircle as the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Zachary leaned down to press his lips gently to Vivian's, a kiss of promise, of beginning, of home. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing in the yard beneath lanterns strung from tree to tree. When the last guests had departed and the ranch hands had retired to their bunkhouse, Zachary led Vivian to the main house, their house now. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ingram," he said, lifting her carefully in his arms to carry her across the threshold, mindful of her still healing wound. Later, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Zachary held her close, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You've given me so much, Zachary, a home, a purpose, a name I can be proud to bear." "You've given me just as much," he said. "Before you, this house was just a place to sleep. The ranch was work, nothing more. Now they're home." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Your home." In the years that followed, the Rocking Eye prospered under their joint stewardship. Zachary's skill with cattle and land was complemented by Vivian's sharp mind for business and finance. They expanded the ranch, built a school for the children of their growing number of workers, and became known throughout the region for their fair dealings and generosity. 2 years after their wedding, Vivian discovered she was with child. The pregnancy was difficult, marked by months of anxiety and careful monitoring by the doctor who rode out from town each week to check on her. But on a snowy December night, with Zachary holding her hand and murmuring words of encouragement, Vivian gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after Zachary's father. "He's perfect," Zachary whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his son for the first time. "He is," Vivian agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Our miracle." 2 years later, their family grew again with the arrival of a daughter they named Rebecca in honor of Zachary's sister. And 3 years after that, to their joyful surprise, another son joined the family, Thomas, a robust baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. On a warm summer evening, nearly 10 years after she had first fled the Tyler farm with nothing but a small bag of possessions and a desperate hope for something better, Vivian sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching her children play in the yard. James, now 7, was showing 5-year-old Rebecca how to throw a lasso, while little Thomas toddled after them on chubby legs. Zachary emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Vivian before settling into the chair beside hers, his gaze following hers to their children. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reaching over to take her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "How different my life might have been," she replied honestly, "if I hadn't found the courage to leave that day. If you hadn't been in the stage office at that exact moment." "Providence," Zachary said simply. "Some things are meant to be," Vivian nodded, squeezing his hand. "Do you remember what Harold said that day when he came here with the gun, that I was worthless because I couldn't bear a child?" "I try not to remember anything about that man," Zachary said, his jaw tightening slightly. Harold Tyler had eventually been sentenced to 5 years in prison for the shooting, and upon his release, had left Colorado for parts unknown, a fact for which they were both grateful. "I've been thinking about it recently," Vivian continued. "Not with pain, but with perspective. Even if we had never been blessed with the children, even if I had truly been barren, I would still have had a life of value and purpose with you. You taught me that." Zachary's expression softened, and he lifted her hand to his lips. "You've always been worth everything to me, Vivian. From the first moment I saw you, children or no children, you're the heart of this place, the heart of me." In the yard, James let out a whoop of triumph as his small lasso settled around a fence post. Rebecca clapped her hands, demanding a turn, while Thomas sat down in the grass, more interested in a butterfly that had landed nearby. Vivian leaned her head against Zachary's shoulder, contentment washing through her like a gentle tide. "I love you," she said softly, "for seeing my worth when I couldn't see it myself, for giving me a home where I truly belong, for these beautiful children." "And I love you," he replied, his voice rich with emotion, "more with each passing day." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Vivian Ingram sat with her husband, watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built together. From desperate flight to profound belonging, From worthlessness to immeasurable value, her journey had been long and at times painful. But here, in this moment, with the love of this good man beside her and the future stretching bright before them, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, worth everything, to the man who had always seen her true value. Worth everything to herself at last.